A federal judge says the twice impeached criminally convicted felon in chief Donald the Con Trump broke the law in sending National Guard troops to Los Angeles. Yeah, that's right. Judge Charles Breyer said that Trump's order to send thousands of troops, including 700 Marines, uh, broke the Posse Comitatus Act. He said was willfully violated that particular act, which is a federal law that prohibits U.S. military forces from enforcing domestic laws. The federal judge rejected the Department of Justice argument the deployment was necessary to protect federal property and personnel, emphasizing that the Posse Comitatus Act prohibits the president from using the military as a domestic police force without congressional approval. Now, while this is going on, Trump, of course, continues to see the same thing in Washington, D.C. You got Mayor Muriel Bowser said she has no problem with these federal law enforcement officers being in and National Guard being in D.C. indefinitely. Now, Illinois, that's a whole different conversation. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker blasted Donald Trump today when it comes to what they say is good information that he plans on sending federal troops there. And in fact, at an Oval Office news conference, Trump said point blank he was going to send troops to Chicago. He would not say when.
Mind up on Chicago, though?
Well, we're going in. I didn't say when. We're going in. When you lose, look, I have an obligation. This isn't a political thing. I have an obligation. When we lose, when 20 people are killed over the last 2.5 weeks and 75 are shot with bullets. So let me tell you a little story about a place called D.C., District of Columbia, right here where we are. It's now a safe zone. We have no crime. It's in such great shape. You can go and actually walk with your children, your wife, your husband. You can walk right down the middle of the street. You're not going to be shot, Peter. You're safe. Everyone likes you anyway. They probably wouldn't do it. But it's so dangerous. And there are people in this audience that you've suffered greatly. There are people in this audience that have been mugged and hurt badly, and they don't want to talk about it. Maybe you were very brave in talking about it. You made quite an impression on a lot of people. I appreciate it. But there were other people in this room that have been hurt very badly just walking down the street in D.C. Washington, D.C. is a...
All right. Here's Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker speaking today.
I'd like to ask a question of my own, and it's one the press should be asking as well. When did we become a country where it's okay for the U.S. president to insist on national television that a state should call him to beg for anything, especially something we don't want? Have we truly lost all sense of sanity in this nation, that we treat this as normal? In the coming days, we expect to see what has played out in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., to happen here in Chicago. First, Donald Trump is positioning armed federal agents and staging military vehicles on federal property, such as the Great Lakes Naval Base. It is likely those agents will be with ICE, Customs and Border Patrol, the Department of Homeland Security, and other similarly situated federal agencies. Many of these individuals are being relocated from Los Angeles for deployment in Chicago. We believe that staging that has already begun started yesterday and continues into today. Second, unidentifiable agents in unmarked vehicles with masks are planning to raid Latino communities and say they're targeting violent criminals. As we saw in Los Angeles, a very, very small percentage of the individuals they will target will be violent criminals. Instead, you're likely to see videos of them hauling away mothers and fathers, traveling to work or picking up their kids from school. Sometimes they will detain, handcuff, and haul away children.
Folks, joining us right now is retired Lieutenant General Russel Honoré. Glad to see you, Doc. Let's get right into it. First and foremost, what do you make of the use of the National Guard as a pawn by Donald Trump to for DC. Now he's threatening Chicago. He's threatening Los. Of course, the judge's ruling is Los Angeles. Well, what do you make of this?
Well, I think a lot of it is performative. I do look at DC as different than Chicago because they're federal control with the Home Rule Act, and the president has the authority to basically take over DC government if that's what he and the Congress decide to do. That being said, DC has a good police department. It's undermanned, and it has a good mayor. And $1 billion was cut out of his budget this year to maintain DC law and order and infrastructure. So we've got a dilemma going on there. I think when the president speak about crime, he also talk about deportation is an underlying fact. And they picked out a lot of people and deported them out of DC. And looking at the situation that the mayor is in, and there was a crime problem and is a crime problem in most of our large metropolitan areas, but it wasn't an emergency to a point where the city was dysfunctional because that is the capital of the United States. Uh, the federal agencies shouldn't have taken an invitation or an order from the president to go in and help the mayor of D.C. Clean up the crime on the street crime. But it shouldn't have taken a request from the mayor to say, hey, you got to give me more judges. The judges are busy, and we can't get the courts to work effectively to try those people. But we're in a dilemma here, Roland, when it comes to crime. Crime is a problem. We know the cities, and they're all not blue cities led by Democratic governors, well, mayors. We have the same problems here in the South, from Jackson to Shreveport to Monroe to Baton Rouge. But the hard thing to defend we've got to work on is over the weekend, there were 7 killed and 54 shot, 57 shot in Chicago this weekend. That opens the door up for the president to say, I'm going there after crime. But what he's really going to do is run a deportation operation, Roland.
Well, to that particular point, Governor Pritzker, in the same news conference, said they have good information that Trump planned. So Chicago has a massive Mexican Independence Day celebration. We've been. I lived there 6 years. We've been there, and let me tell you something. I mean, it's backed up for miles. Downtown is packed. Upwards of 500,000, 1 million folks. So they said they have information that Trump plans on having federal authorities raiding folks who will be picnicking on that particular day, which is September 16th. He's called that cruel. He's called that shameful. And he said it is all about to instill fear and intimidation in the lives of Mexican Americans.
It's the deportation operation, underscored with a focus on crime. Look, I was in Chicago in 2013. Ron Emanuel was the mayor. President Obama was in the White House. And I was in the community of Inglewood. You know where that is, Roy? In Chicago,
Of course.
Inglewood. So I'm hanging around in
Yeah,
Inglewood
know
for a
well.
couple of days, going to high schools, talking leadership and preparedness and trying to encourage young people to do the right thing. And the people in Inglewood were terrified with the amount of crime they had to deal with. And there weren't enough police to do with it. I actually recommended to the mayor and the governor in 2013, if you have to get a hold of the street, mobilize your National Guard. That's why you got them. The
Now,
governor,
now,
but it's not
now,
what
now,
Trump
now,
is
now,
doing.
now.
Yeah,
But here's the deal. First of all, I remember that because I actually wrote a column that was in the
yeah,
Daily Beast. I quoted you in it.
yeah,
We talked about that very thing. But this is the difference though that I think that when
yeah,
we talked about that then, because what I wrote was I said the mayor has to be the one to
right,
make the request for additional state police support or National
right.
Guard. to the
Right.
governor, and then,
Right.
as opposed to Trump unilaterally deciding based upon with no intel, no evidence, no nothing, I'm just going to do this willy nilly. That's the difference here.
Exactly, Roland. And that's the point I was getting to. This was what they needed to do to get a hold of crime, the street crime, much of it being perpetrated by young people of color. Let me just leave it at that. Black on black crime, much of it.
Yeah, but it's a deal. But also a big part of this is dealing with the reality of the massive amount of
Yeah, guns coming out of Indiana. The folks there on the ground and the police have repetitively said that
that
90% of them
that
come
that
right
that,
out of Indiana.
that come from Indiana. Yeah, they come from
Look,
Indiana.
listen to me, Roland. We could have dealt with this. We had Obama in the White House. We own at least one or two legislative branches. We own the Attorney General. We didn't do jack about that. We didn't do jack about it, and that was a missed opportunity. We got to deal with crime, and we got to deal with the root cause of crime. Kids dropping out of school, getting into contraband economy. That has to be fixed, and you can do something about that. I was
But
working with the Children's Defense Fund, and they said if you're not reading at fourth grade level by the time you're 10 years old, you got a 50% chance to have a run in with the law by the time you're 14. We got to go after that, and we've got to be resourced. And people in the community need to demand it of the mayor and the governor. Why the hell? You know when Trayvon Martin, that poor little boy, got killed, that became a national incident. We didn't do shit about 8 or 9 young kids got killed in Chicago that same week. It wasn't shit done about it, Roland. Nothing was done about it.
but here's the issue that we face, and again, I'm gonna tell you about a meeting at the White House when Trump was
Uh-huh.
there the first time. He's meeting with
Yeah.
TV anchors. I was invited to 3 of the meetings. I attended 2 of them, and I brought up Chicago. And he
Yeah.
said then, he says Ron was in the Oval Office and Ron was talking about just what you just talked about. Ron was talking about education, jobs. He's like, no, Ron, that's not going to fix the problem. That's not going to fix the crime problem. And I'm sitting there going, yeah. If you talk to any police chief, they'll tell you you have to confront that. The reason it's down in Baltimore is because of that. The reason it's down in other places. The reason it was down in D.C. is because of that. Now, here's the
Right.
problem: Republicans don't want to fund that stuff.
Oh.
Pass that. See, so what they want it both ways. They want to complain about crime, white folks. That tickles their ears and gets them excited, but they don't want to deal with the root cause of crime and to make the level of investment you're talking about.
Yeah, and I remember that time there was a beer company moved to Chicago with about 300 jobs. They gave them billions of dollars of tax break to bring in about 300 jobs, as opposed to investing on their own people. We got a dilemma going on here that's got to be cleaned up, and our messaging is not clear, and our audio and our video is not matching. Ron, we got to clean up the crime, but the way President Trump is going about it, what he's doing and what he's saying, fighting crime, is deceived as a deception, as a deportation operation. And it's not just about crime; it's domination of the blue, the major cities that are controlled by Democrats. That's what he's going after. That's the issue he's making for the next election, for his follow-on for the midterm. Make it about crime, but this is a deportation operation, and he's captured the news with it. But inside these cities, why in the hell the people in Chicago are not protesting today with 7 dead and 57 shot over the weekend? Why in the hell they ain't raising hell about that? Yeah, I think that's the dilemma we got to address. We made some, we talk a lot about the high profile cases that end up in the news, like poor Trayvon Martin. But that same week that happened, there were several, 5 or 6 kids killed in Chicago, nothing made of it because it's black on black crime. We've got to make sure we control the narrative, but we act where we have to inside our cities. In Baton Rouge, where I live, 3 weeks ago, there were 5 killings in one weekend right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a little old town less than 300,000. We've got to address crime in the city, and we've got to put the heat on our politicians and do something about it because they got money, but they're giving tax breaks to industry as opposed to investing in these communities.
We know that there are a number of organizations that are actually on the ground in Chicago. Grassroots organizations are doing the work. How important is that, based upon all the experiences you have, to make sure that those organizations are funded and are doing the work?
Yeah, and they do good work. They're engaged with after-school programs. They're engaged with the traditional organizations like ROTC in high school and boys and girls clubs. All those serve as a meaningful way to keep our young people engaged and help them get their education. But the kids that fall out of the support network, they're the ones that end up in the contraband economy and end up in the gunfights. And that's got to be fixed, Mustaf. We've got to, and the community got to raise hell, not just about the high profile when the police shoot somebody. We've got to raise hell in those communities and demand that these local public officials do something about the crime. People ought to be able to sit on their front porch. And Donald Trump, as President Trump, has pulled the scab there, and he know he's getting some support to reduce crime. But at the same time, we know also, I believe, that this is an undercover deportation operation and not just about crime. Because if it was, he'd be going to Jackson, Mississippi, and going to at Shreveport, Louisiana, inside of Speaker Johnson's area of operation in Monroe, and deal with the crime.
Yeah. I remember after Katrina, how you came in, stepped in, got everything kind of moving in a proper direction, made sure that folks had dignity and respect, and how you were handling the operation. How important is that also in Chicago to make sure that we are, one, making sure that folks who are there on the ground doing the work have the power and resources that are necessary? And also, how do we make sure that there's dignity as we are addressing, the issues of violence that happens in some areas?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily the military that fails to show dignity to people like in D.C. They're pretty benign, walking around, and their presence alone can calm the street down. Where we see there's some areas of concern is when ICE agents just stop people based on their complexion and their accent and start pulling them in and stopping them based on what they look like and what they sound like and where they're working. That is criminal. And, there's federal laws against that, but the ICE agents are not paying much attention to federal laws. They're paying attention to Stephen Miller, who tell them just go out and arrest people. We'll sort it out later. And they've made some very embarrassing arrests that way. And the public has to make sure that they're doing everything they can to protect their neighbors. And there are procedures that have been put out there that worked in Los Angeles and some in D.C. to alert people so innocent people are not there being picked up and taken into ICE detention centers.
General Honoré, how are you today? This is Larry Walker. How are you?
Hey, Larry, what's going on?
Yeah, so I wanted to thank you for all your work, and you made some really important comments. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, obviously we see what's happening in D.C. President's talked today about possibly, Chicago and Baltimore City. But I want to talk a little bit about the issue relating, we look at research and over-policing in Black and brown communities, and which often leads to abuse. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the challenge with that. Historically, what we see when we see too many law enforcement or military, in this case, individuals from the military in Black and brown communities, which increases the likelihood, you talked about it, U.S. citizens, et cetera, being targeted and profiled. And how do you maintain that balance?
Yeah, I think the profiling is happening primarily with the deportation. But again, it's hard to defend what happened in Chicago over the weekend. And we know most of these are in underserved communities. I hadn't looked at every name and every address, but that's what history shows, that this is happening in and around the same communities, in and around the same age groups with guns. 57 wounded We call that in the military wounded in action. Some of them people will never be able to work again. Some of them will end up in wheelchairs. Some of them will never meet their potential, and many of them were innocent bystanders. And then 7 dead. 7 people that will never be able to contribute to the economy or to the community because they got killed over the week in Chicago. We're going to have a hell of a time defending that mayor and say, I don't want help with crime. I do think there's a middle ground that has to be reached between the mayor and the governor and address what the hell they're doing about crime in the city. Because when I was in Inglewood in 2013, the people were yelling at me about why can't they do something about it? And some improvements have been made, but we got a long way to go when you get 7 dead over one weekend in Chicago at 57 shot. That has to be fixed.
Avis, what's your
Yeah.
question?
So,
Avis?
General Honoré, wonderful to speak with you, sir. You are an icon of leadership, and we've talked about the need for holistic strategies to address the issue of crime. But I'd like your perspective on leadership. How important is that? And what type of leadership do we need in order to make a meaningful impact on this issue?
Well, we got to walk the talk, and we got to resource it. Let's talk about the city of New Orleans for a minute. They're like 500 policemen short. And let's talk about D.C. I think they need another 2,000 police, as we talked about. That has to be resourced. And that's done by city council and by legislatures in some cases, as in the case of D.C. If you want to deal with crime, more police help, more after-school programs, more enforcement of kids dropping out of school when they're 14. It's a holistic approach and ability to train them in jobs, because if they can't get a job, they're going to end up in the contraband economy, and that's when the shootings start. It has to be a holistic program. But as a party, as the Democratic Party go about this, we've got to address how and what we're going to do, and it's got to be resourced. As I said, at the time I was in Chicago in 2013, there about that time, the city and the state was giving billions of dollars to a company to move to Chicago, a beer company, as I recall, and they were underinvested in Inglewood, and Chicago police was short. The schools were underfunded, and they had very little after-school programs designed to keep these kids engaged and to keep them off the street and keep them in healthy activities. So we got to address that inside our own hood. We got to look in the mirror and figure out this is not just Washington causing this problem. We got to figure it out at the municipal level and demand, as I recommended to the D.C., that while this is going on, demand those other 3,000 officers you need. Demand that those court seats get filled. Demand that you get the money to be able to maintain the city. Use this as an opportunity to get federal resources. But what the president is doing is not what he's doing, is how he's doing it, disguising a deportation operation that's going to deport a lot of minorities under the rubric of crime. And at the same time, the city and the governor of Illinois has to address crime. It can't be just about don't come here. They've got to figure out how the hell they're going to tell the people in Chicago what they're going to do and how they're using their resources to address the shootings and the wounded people every weekend in Chicago.
All right, General Russel Honoré, we surely appreciate you joining us today's show. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Keep it alive. Thank you, Roland.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.